in advance. So I'll welcome Modar to the stage, along with Andra and Rishi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking for this before lunch. I'm super excited for this fireside chat. I think we have a video. Let's start with a video.
As an immigrant, I never dreamed that I would be able to run for United States Congress. When I was 22 years old, I anxiously left my parents in India and traveled thousands of miles with a student visa, a few $100s, and a zeal for the American dream. Today, I'm a city council member, an activist, a Valley high-tech executive, dedicated husband, and loving father. Thank you, America. My name is Rishi Kumar. When my neighborhood experienced a brazen burglary, I organized a neighborhood safety watch program. My passion grew as I led Lego Robotics, entrepreneurship boot camps for disadvantaged youths, open mics to help local businesses, and running fundraisers for our senior center. When issues emerged, our community surprisingly reached out to me for solutions. Today we have big challenges. American voices are being drowned out by dark money in politics. Disengaged elected leaders are crippling our system. But I can champion change. We fearlessly challenged unjust rate increases of San Jose Water Company. We dropped burglaries by 41%, more than any Silicon Valley city. I was humbled to be re-elected with the most votes in city history. Not all Democrats are the same, versus me, who has pledged to never accept special interest money, bringing a people-centric agenda, tech expertise, and a getting things done approach. This race is about addressing our challenges with housing, homelessness,
And so on and so on. Thank you so much, Rishi, for joining us. I'm excited to have you together with Andra. Just for background, Rishi and I have known each other for about 10 years or so. You ran for Congress twice. You're quite plugged into the politics ecosystem. We tried to get a good number of politicians on stage. Unfortunately, it was too late. But what I wanted to cover on this panel is things that people just don't like to talk about. I like to call them taboos, and I want to start with the very first one, humanoid weaponization, a very loaded word. I see a good number of politicians now trying to cover this topic. We reached out to Senator Britt, who has written just an op-ed just like 2 months ago. And I think it's super timely. You know, we're talking about the technology aspects of the humanoids and the use cases, the commercialization, the capital allocation. We just don't talk about the other side because it's a tool, and I do believe that people use tools for good purposes, and there are always bad actors. So why don't we talk about humanoid weaponization, what you think that is. We can cover geopolitics, and then lastly, anything that is considered to be taboo, which is a term that Andra wanted to insert into this panel.
I have a list.
Well, firstly, congratulations to Modar and Andra for putting together a phenomenal event. Can't believe it's the first year. And great turnout. We had some excellent demos, and the robotic world has taken off with a big explosive set of
Not
events.
allowed to use that word and robots. This is the decree from anybody commercializing robots. And this is why, you know, it's really good to talk about taboo topics. Because when you're trying to sell your company's products, there's certain words you just won't go near.
Yeah. And we did try to get Gavin Newsom this year, and it was a little bit last minute, couldn't make it. But next year, we'll likely have the governor. But also, there's a race for the next governor, which is happening. We have Toni Atkins, who's the president of the state senate. She is in the running. We have Betty E., who I believe is on the Board of Equalization.
We have Eleni, who's currently the lieutenant governor, and then we have Tony, who's the current state superintendent for California. So we hope to get some of these players and have conversations about policies, whether it's for artificial intelligence, but also for robotics and this movement that is happening today. Now, when we look at the book that you're seeing is Winning the AI Arms Race, and obviously I think the whole robotics industry is embedded as part of that, because when you look at the large language models, they are now morphing into more of the agentic platforms, because to leverage the LLMs, these agents are now being deployed in different verticals. And then as part of that, the robots would have all that sort of data. The AI has to be embedded into these, into the robotic industry based on different verticals. So we see the movement that is happening. And whether we want it or not, you know, AI and robots could be used for sort of evil purposes. And the definition of evil is really what we need to come up with. The bottom line is, it will be used for warfare. And when it comes to, for example, walking up to a nuclear facility, will likely use a robot. And the next superpower could be the one that is actually getting robots to be out there in the battlefields. So yes, that's the future, and we all need to reconcile to that. And in America, when we look at the AI arms race, we have to essentially create pieces of legislations that are pragmatic. And similarly, when you look at China, they've actually jumped ahead with their robotic industry. And the big imperative is for us to ensure we as a nation will make those right choices to apply robot for good purposes, but also to ensure that we are the superpower, we continue to be the superpower.
Now, one of the issues is that these really do need to be nuanced discussions. However, there is an organization, Stop the Killer Robots. Anyway, that organization has been putting forward a proposal to the United Nations for a number of years now, and it has been passed by all barring 2 of the 3 superpowers. Anybody want to guess which 2 superpowers they are? Yes, Russia is one of them. It's the United States is the other one that won't sign on to the Killer Robots Act. China says we will sign up. Now, how you weight that, it's hard to say. But I'd love to ask Rishi a little bit about balancing the Silicon Valley versus Sacramento tension. Because I would say my biggest failure for Silicon Valley robotics has been failing to engage with politicians. And we're a very small organization, we don't have lobbyists, and Silicon Valley is sometimes a very long way from Sacramento. Even more so, if you remember back 2017, it was the heyday of Chinese VC firms, design studios, manufacturing outlets in Silicon Valley. And that's where you were going if you were a robotics startup. And I had a few discussions with people from the East Coast, particularly involved in federal government, and they're like, no, we wouldn't have Chinese money in robotics. And I'm like, well, actually, that's what's happening. That's who's funding robotics. And shortly thereafter, CFIUS happened. And that was a massive change. So for me, it said, this is the power of what can happen at a federal level, but it also spoke to the distance between the West Coast and the East Coast. Now, who knows what is going to happen next year? But how should we navigate this in the robotics industry? Rishi, do you have any ideas?
So when you look at AI, I keep referencing AI because it's been happening. Senate Bill 1047, I don't know if you guys have heard of Senate Bill 1047, that Scott Wiener championed in Sacramento. And so we had conversations with Gavin Newsom why that bill was not good. Because if you see the European Union, the industry has left, AI has left, because they have overtly regulated AI. And that's very dangerous, which is exactly what Senate Bill 1047 was doing. And so the imperative is upon us in Silicon Valley. You know, we just had a previous panel discussion. We were talking about regulating bottoms up and not top down. Because if we leave it to the politicians, you know, Washington would like to shut down. There are politicians like Elizabeth Warren who call AI as the big evil, who will also call robotics as the big evil-headed monster, and we have to shut it down. But that's not the reality. You know, if you try to pause AI, the rest of the countries are going to jump forward, and they will actually rule the world. So it's important for us in Silicon Valley to develop a conscience and a playbook of how we need to get it right. And I have a chapter dedicated to that in this particular book. And so these are types of thinking that we need to insert into how we are developing products. We need to engage with Washington, and we need to ensure that the industry is leading the effort and not the politicians.
On a state level, Governor Newsom is doing a good amount of work on AI. California is usually always first at defining certain federal laws or laws that are on the state level, which later on become federal. Tell us a little bit more about what Governor Newsom is working on. I would have loved to ask him. He couldn't be here in person. He's in Sacramento. I think we're going to put this on his calendar for the next event. But nonetheless, what is based on your knowledge and your close connection to Sacramento is being worked on for AI, which you think will make it to the federal stage?
Yes, there are quite a few AI bills that have been proposed, and the way I would summarize this is that Governor Newsom is cautious in his approach, and that's the reason why he vetoed 1047. And so many of these bills that are being proposed by legislators in Sacramento or even in Washington, D.C., they are not being signed by the governor or by the president, because I think we are being cautious and we have to get it right. We cannot regulate just like the EU did, and we shut down the businesses here in Silicon Valley. That will not be productive for us.
Yeah, I would love to see closer connections. As I said, I think this is the biggest weak area of what we've done with Silicon Valley Robotics. And I've been saying I would love to reinstitute National Robotics Week, because it was actually managed by iRobot people. And when iRobot was acquired, that disappeared. But I would love to do that much more along the lines of Hill Day, which is where large tech groups, for example IEEE, get people from different technology areas to Washington with a whole lot of meetings lined up. We're a very small organization and can't manage that, but MODA's kicked off International Humanoids Day, and that is another great way to get the discussions in the ears of people that matter, because I still see a huge difference. We have legislators talking about autonomous vehicles and AI, but those are the technological areas where there are giant companies with large stacks of money and lots of lobbyists. Hands up how many robotics companies have big wallets and lots of lobbyists, aside from possibly Intuitive Surgical. Yeah, we're an emerging industry, and this is perhaps one of the biggest problems. How do we get our voice heard in places that it counts? And I was going to say, great idea, MODA, International Humanoids Day, because people love seeing what is happening in robots. They also love saying robots are going to steal our jobs. And that's one of the other taboo topics we wanted to mention. But I'll get to that after we talk a little bit about, could it be a good way to go about this? Having a day of robots and getting politicians engaged.
And one of the things we wanted to do with the event is to kind of have a great cocktail of interesting topics, one of which was covered earlier in a panel by Aaron Prother, who is the head of the standards for humanoid robotics. How do you think these standards can actually facilitate the job for say, Governor Newsom's, or even regulations potentially that could be going into Washington? And why aren't so many organizations vocal about this?
To some extent, I think the culture in Silicon Valley is that we are focused on innovation, and looking at the energy that we see in the demonstrations. It's sort of like at that very geeky level, and there is a saying that we may not want politics, but politics may want us. So as the CEOs and the founders, they have to be a little cognizant that some of these regulations that may come our way would actually be the end of business for us, perhaps. So it's important that we have to engage and engage in political discussions, whether it's with the governor or whether it's with the local congressman, but essentially provide that influence where they are able to be a messenger out there in Washington. It doesn't mean that we have to hire lobbyists, but just ensuring that dialogue would be very, very helpful.
So Senator Britt explicitly wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, I think, or Washington Post, one of the two, saying, whistling basically, or blowing a whistle on Chinese humanoids being used for or as weapons. What's your take on that?
So I think that's a fact, and I'm glad somebody is calling it out. Now, we in America need to do a few things. In California, we actually did the computer science curriculum, which I was very proud to be part of. So every K-12 public school child is studying computer science. Now we need to redo the curriculum for artificial intelligence and for robotics. And we need to have public-private sector partnerships, and we need to ensure that there is a single body in Washington that is responsible for AI and robotics. And this is how we can beat China in their game. That's critical. I think he's addressed the problem, and we need to find solutions now.
We are actually looking for a balanced political representation to get the National Robotics Caucus back up. I've been involved with that with IEEE Robotics and Automation. So we should definitely talk about that. But I'm going to be a contrarian here. I think that calling out humanoids and weaponization of Chinese humanoid robots as an existential threat, I believe that was called, to America, honestly, you're over-engineering, you're overthinking it. We have perfectly good autonomous weapons without them needing to be humanoids. And I find the same thing with one of the other taboo topics, sex robots. They don't really have to be fully humanoid to be capable of being a handy sex object. And if you look at the accident and emergency statistics of any hospital, there are entire journals devoted to sex-related mishaps involving various objects. It doesn't have to be a humanoid. Any vacuum cleaner will do.
I think we have about 4 minutes left. One last question from me, and then I want to take a few questions from the audience. Rishi, I know you ran for Congress twice, and I know you have a strong opinion about who is the next governor of California. Tell us about the current work that's being done as a group for AI in Sacramento, whatever you can tell us about it, because I know there's a lot that's been happening behind the scenes. We talked about it in private, behind private doors, but tell us a little bit more about what should people expect coming out of Sacramento in the near term when it comes to AI, embodied AI, because AI is, or robotics, which is the manifestation of physical AI.
Well, you may have heard of the deep fake bill that was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. So to some extent, I think its piecemeal approach when it comes to legislation of AI and robotics has not been thought of much yet. So AI is the big evil that they are trying to address. And to some extent, I believe Silicon Valley has not quite engaged with Sacramento. And that's the reason why we see all these piecemeal bills that are coming. that are going to be harmful for the industry. And Senate Bill 1047 is a prime example. So, an inventor of a pen, if somebody used the pen instead of writing, if they used it to poke somebody in the eye, then the inventor of the pen or the manufacturer of the pen would be liable for it, So that was Senate Bill 1047. So if you leave it to the legislators, it won't be done right. What I noticed though with the Trump administration is we have an AI czar, somebody who's in charge. And in my book, I talk about actually creating an organization focused for this particular purpose. And so if that happens, I think we'll have an approach which is a lot more pragmatic, but also process-driven to ensure that we are making the right choices. Now, going back to the candidates who are running, I think we need to understand what their policy is on AI and robotics. And many a times, if you look at the last presidential race with Vice President Kamala Harris, she had a 90-day runway, and we didn't have the chance to analyze what her policy positions were. And given the fact that the election for the governor is in 2026, it's giving us an opportunity to invite them, and it's very easy because they would like to engage with us. So invite Betty Yee or Tony Atkins or Eleni and invite them into your backyard, have discussions with them, and try to understand where they stand on policies. That could be very powerful because it's important for us to educate them a little bit too. And we don't see that happening because we are so focused on innovation, we in Silicon Valley. And I think we need to change that.
Thank you very much. We can line up questions, and there is a microphone coming over. Comes over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Milton Walker, formerly of Intel Corporation. You guys each touched on some really interesting and common concepts in this panel and the previous panel with Aaron Prather. And a lot of it was about finding alignment and engagement, right? And around culture and driving some of the engagement from the larger community of people to help drive some of these outcomes, right? How do you both kind of create the culture of driving that engagement from a top-down perspective and a bottom-up perspective? How do you change that engagement so we can get those things passed and get those conversations happening?
So, when you look at the innovation that is happening here, we haven't really approached it from bottoms up or top down. We just sort of like wait for something to happen. You look at social media and the firestorm it created with that hearing. Mark Zuckerberg had to get up and apologize to families who are sitting behind, who are impacted with the woes of Instagram and Facebook or whatever else, right? So to some extent, this has not been part of a culture, and that's the reason why we in Silicon Valley, and it can be driven from the venture capital investors, but we need to write a playbook of how do we apply our conscience to how we develop technology and solutions. It's absolutely lacking today. And that's when the hammer of Uncle Sam comes and falls upon us, and then we have to correct course, but that's not the way we should behave. So to some extent, we have to drive it bottoms up and engage with the policymakers. That would make a huge difference. Good question.
Just a quick comment here. I think it's always striking a right balance between moving fast and breaking things in innovation and adhering to certain rules and guidelines, because we live in a civilized society. And so it's always going to be a push and pull, but engaging those conversations is really important. Sacramento is an hour away, like you mentioned, from here, yet there is so much distance, virtually, in terms of theories and agreements. And I think there is no other way to bridge that gap than to engage in meaningful conversations, being proactive, and just sitting on a round table and hammering the issues together.
I would love to see more actual feedback and studies around the role of robotics and labor, because ultimately political decisions are driven by grassroots opinions. And if the primary opinion that people have about robots is, 1, they're sexy, 2, they're dangerous, and 3, they're going to steal my job, then that's what we need to combat. And it's very, very hard to come back and say, well, your job might change, but it's not actually going to steal your job. And we know that robots increase productivity and they increase the viability of companies. And I usually say, you shouldn't get worried if your company is talking about robots, because it's going to grow, it's going to be profitable, it's going to expand, you're going to get better jobs. You should be worried if your company is not getting robots, because it's going to go bankrupt in the next year.
It's the way of the future, and if you remember just like last year, we were talking about pausing AI, but if we pause AI, the rest of the world is going to move fast and furious forward, and we will fall behind by like a decade very quickly, because these things take time. So the imperative is for us to embrace these things and educate our politicians that this is absolutely the right approach. We cannot fall behind. And that's the only way we can ensure that we beat China at the game.
Absolutely. With that, I want to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Rishi, for joining us. Thank you, Andra. I know Matt Ondler, president of Axiom Space, apologizes and he couldn't be here. So because we are just a little bit over time, we're going to continue the rest of the afternoon and probably be back on track by then.
Yeah, and that means I believe it is lunchtime.
It is lunchtime.
It is lunchtime, everybody. Be back on time